Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to share with you the first of the 6 movements that I have been writing. The 6 movements are part of a set titled The Product of Persistence. You can find more information about this on my blog, where I described the motivation behind this piece in great detail. Anyway, the goal of the entire set is to musically represent a mathematical process called multiplicative persistence. And to briefly reiterate this process, in multiplicative persistence, you start with a multi-digit number, then you multiply the digits by each other to obtain a new number. Then you repeat this process, multiplying those digits by each other to obtain yet another number. And so you continue this until you obtain just a single digit, which is called the multiplicative digital root. So one of the motivations behind this first movement is the idea that, well, we have this original number and it feels a little insecure because it has this piece of its identity that must be, as the text says, traced and not effaced. So it's part of its idiosyncratic identity that must be found. So you can see the text here. I wrote out the entirety of the text in a recent blog post. But so you can see here in the musical score, I may have mentioned this before, but the instrumentation for this is piano and voice, so it's an art song. And so I've tried as best as possible to capture the sentiment and the relationships within the text and within the mathematical principle itself in how I set it to music. So without further ado, I will launch into a discussion of how I musically represented these relationships. So to start, notice in the very first chord here, the base of this chord is C, then we go up a 7th, then we go up a 3rd, then we go up a 5th, and then up another 5th. And this is by no means arbitrary. This is due to the actual original number, which is 7,355, or 7355. So as you can see, I stacked up the intervals accordingly. So we have 7 is in the 7th, then 3, then 5, then 5. And so right from the very beginning, there's this sense of a number, of a special number. And then here, I have the exact same thing, 7 plus 3 plus 5 plus 5. However, the chord sounds a little different, has a slightly different quality to it, not only because it's different pitches, but because I made use of the fact that a 7th could be interpreted as a major or minor 7th, and likewise with a 3rd, it could be a major or minor 3rd. In this instance, the 3rd remains a major 3rd, and the 5ths remain perfect 5ths, but the 7th becomes a minor 7th as opposed to a major 7th. And so I actually repeat this 3 times. So we have in the first measure, then the second measure, the only difference is that I displaced one of the pitches, so that this D sharp at the top is now an octave lower. Here, same thing again, this time I displaced another one of the pitches, so that the C sharp that was originally here right above middle C is now 2 octaves higher. So throughout the piece, there's this intervallic hegemony of 7, 5, and 3, mostly manifested in the intervals. So I tended to favor especially perfect 5ths, given the fact that 5 makes up half of this original number, appearing twice. But then also in the 7ths and 3rds that are also quite rampant throughout. And so here in measure 4, I did the exact same thing, but this time it's a melodic figure. So we have C, then up a 7th, then up a 3rd. And then here you could go up a 5th to A, but I went down a 4th to A. So it's really just the A that should have been there, but an octave lower. Same thing with the E here. So this repeats for several measures. Then here, I utilized a similar technique to what I'd done at the beginning, using the fact that, well, a 7th could be a major or a minor 7th. Here it's a major instead of a minor 7th. And so that lends a slightly different aura to it. And so you can see throughout the piece that I've used that figure, that motif, in a variety of ways, a variety of formats, sometimes not using the entire figure and just really deforming and just being really flexible with it. So I'm just letting you look through the score right here to see the text. So it's a fairly brief piece. After all, it's only one stanza of a poem. It's mostly a syllabic text setting. And so another technique I used was the prominence of a certain pitch class. And without getting too theoretical about this, it's just a way of labeling pitches. So C sharp is defined with the number 1, D with 2, D sharp with 3, and so on. So there are 11 of them. And considering that there are 12 pitches, one of them receives the designation of 0, and that's C. So from C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, going up, you go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Well, considering that the multiplicative digital root of this number is 5, I, of course, had to do something with the pitch class 5, which happens to be the note F. So you will notice in the vocal line a prominence, sort of, the notes are kind of circling around F and really favoring and gravitating towards that note. And same thing in the piano part. So I'll let you take another look here. Note the frequency with which I use this note here. And even when I'm not explicitly referring to that note, the notes kind of gravitate towards it. So for instance, here, this whole thing leads to this note F, to this resolution. It's a type of scale that almost is drawn to that note. And then here we end in an F majorish kind of harmony, which of course descends into something different, which I'll get to in just a second. So you'll notice that we have a certain chord here, this sort of special chord, the C, B, E flat, B flat, F chord. And then it sort of resolves. If you were to hear the two chords side by side, this one and the very last one, this harmony right here, it almost feels like this is a resolution of the first one, which I find rather significant. And also notice F right at the top there and F right at the top right here. So that note is preserved throughout the entire transformation. So it's as if this whole piece is, so we present a sort of problem or dilemma, and then we go through all this and then it's resolved at the end. As if, okay, so first we're presented with this confusing number, then after all this sort of lamenting over the fact that there's something hidden that must be found, then there's this resolve at the end. We're going to find it, which does indeed happen in the succeeding movements, which I will reveal to you at a future time. And finally, I tried to set the text in such a way that it would not, literally, the music wouldn't excessively represent the text, so it wouldn't be too literal or obvious. But in some subtle ways, I tried to make this evident. So for instance, in this very first phrase, I am merely a number, nothing more. Notice the sort of almost loneliness, isolation, that kind of feeling of the piano part. It's just a single line. It has this sort of desolate feel to it. And then this sort of stammering vocal part where it just kind of revolves around these two pitches. And it's low in the soprano register. And then here it rises in hope a little bit, yet I find myself uniquely placed. It rises up a fourth here to a B flat. And then in a complex web of patterns, here the vocal part sort of loses any semblance of rhythm it had, and instead is kind of interwoven into this piano part, which is suddenly a lot more florid. Then we have infinite in extent. Suddenly we have this vocal line that uses a much larger range of the voice. We go all the way from E flat here to a high D flat that one cannot in a lifetime explore. And at this point, we become very harmonically explorative. You can mostly see that in the piano part, but it's in both. And here, right at this point, is where the voice breaks off for a short interval, and the piano kind of explores a little. That which must be traced. If you listen to this, it's probably easier to hear than to see. Then you'll notice that the piano is sort of following the vocal line, and they're repeating some of the same pitches. So there's this idea of tracing. Not effaced is my idiosyncratic identity. Here you'll notice that the speed of the syllables at which they're being spoken speeds up a little. And so then we get a different feel, more resolute, rhythmic feel at idiosyncratic identity. And then here, that which is inherent. Here at the word inherent, we have a sense of, well, inherence, because the C here is part of the F major harmony. I alluded earlier to the prominence and significance of the note F. And here it's significant that the vocal line does not end on the note F, but rather ends on C, which is part of the F major triad. And also another underlying feature here is the fact that F major has sort of been inherent throughout the whole piece leading up to this moment, but now it's finally revealed here at the ending. Of course, that quickly dissolves into something else, but this is sort of another way in which the music represents what the text is trying to convey.